Hello, everyone. Rod, it's been a while. Hadn't seen you in a while. Um,
Has been a spell.
it's been a while. Yep. Like I said in my last class, I apologize for being a little bit late. I'm glad I made the 15-minute cutoff, right? Where if the professor doesn't show up in 15 minutes, you get all A's. I'm gonna get emails now because people are gonna watch these videos, and I'm gonna get an email from students be like, "Well, you promised us all A's because you were there just like 15 minutes, according to my clock, Central Standard Time." I've had students also argue that because I didn't put Central Standard Time like in my like email one time, I was like, don't forget your blah 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 is due by 9 p.m. or whatever it was. They emailed me was like, was that 9 p.m. Pacific time or like Martian time? Like it was like, come on. I so now you will always see me put CST, Central Standard Time. Um, well, how's everybody tonight? Awesome. These are the dog days of summer right here. Like this is where it's like, okay, it's no longer exciting that it's hot outside. You're like, at first you're like, all right, it's hot. We can go swimming. And you go swimming like 4 times, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of done swimming. Is this gonna stop being hot now? Nope. It just gets hotter. And the weird rain has got my allergies all acting all crazy and like gnats are everywhere. I've got gnats everywhere right now, flying in my face. Yeah, maybe it's just me.
No,
Um,
well, flies have been bad here,
yeah,
real
that's
bad.
that's crazy. I like I'm like, what are we missing in the food chain that used to eat this that are no longer present? Because I gotta get some ducks or some chickens or something. I don't know. Um,
I'm sure it has something to do with the pandemic.
I'm yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it's tied to it
Sorry.
in some way. I'm sure it does. Um, I wouldn't doubt if it does, honestly. Um, well, uh, so for those who weren't in class last time, we had a really good discussions kind of talking through, explaining like how to interpret test scores. Um, and kind of since we're in the middle of the semester here, I'd like to offer we can and I'll keep it open to any questions you have about course material. Um, we can do that while also keeping it open to questions related to practicum, internship, licensure, um, specialty, certifications, private practice especially would be a good one to talk about. Um, in case you've got questions in relation to any of that stuff. Okay. Um, I can talk about literally psychology to a blank wall. And so if nobody wants to talk about anything, I'm sure I can come up with something. But I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about those practical things because usually I do that twice in a semester. And here, this time, I've only got it scheduled really officially for the last week of class. And so just want to let you all know you don't have to wait until then. It might be helpful to ask those questions now, or at least some of them. Sound good? Awesome. Um, and when you ask your questions related to that stuff, let me know if you're a school counselor, an LPC, or LMFT, or if you're none of those, then why you're here. I've had students be like, "Wait a minute, what? What is this class?" Like this is counseling assessment. I'm in the wrong class, I think. After the fourth week, I've had students do that. I don't even know what has. I'm worried about you, whoever you are. I'm worried about you. All right. What questions y'all have for me?
Dr. A, this is Maya. Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I have a question regarding, and I'm working toward my LPC, and I'm
Nice.
realizing it's
the dark
I
side.
have so many questions about the practicum and the 3,000 hours. But before all of that, the email we received this week about the assessment that we have to take that proves that we're ready to go to the pre-practicum part of our degree plan.
Uh-huh.
I was just wondering, they said we could take it now. Like I just crossed 30 hours. Yay. So I can
Awesome.
technically take it
Congratulations.
now.
Yeah.
Thank you. But the question is, and I guess it goes back to even our discussion last week, that one pre-assessment is going to determine whether I can get started. Are there going to be any other avenues to kind of supplement that? If I don't, I think we have to get like a 66%. So it's
Yeah.
not
And
that big
And
of
I'm
a
glad you brought that up
breach, but
because I know, number one, you're not the only student like having questions about that and even feeling some of the anxiousness associated with taking such a test. That's completely normal and anticipated. I can promise you, because we just got out of an all faculty meeting and all the full timers for the counseling department got together. We are all in agreement to not stress out the students. We don't want y'all stressed out about it. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to pass, so don't just like pretend like it doesn't exist. But as it were already, prior to us changing to this structure, in pre-prac, you would be required to do a portfolio. And if you didn't pass that portfolio, you wouldn't be allowed to continue on into your practicum. That portfolio consisted of, you were given a case vignette, like a paragraph of information about a case. Then you had to make a diagnosis that was reasonable and a treatment plan based on your own personal counseling theory that was congruent with actual, you couldn't just say CBT and talk about existential, right? Then you would also have to write a paper, your personal counseling philosophy paper, how you saw it, and hit like some really specific highlights, both of which would be sent to us full-timers. 2 professors would read your stuff. We would grade it, either pass or fail based on some criteria. And as it turns out, we hated doing that because we knew that the subjective nature of us just like eyeballing this person's like essay, this personal counseling philosophy paper is like, well, I agree with that, but what if I don't like this person? Like, what if this person's like just a mean person, but just happens to know all the existential buzzwords? You know what I'm saying? Like, how, on top of that, and how can we quantify or even use pass or fail to assess the effectiveness of our teaching and or the effectiveness of our teaching in relation to like long-term success? So we needed a way to quantify that. And we used to, before the portfolios, this is us going back to what we used to do in the first place. Before the portfolios, we used to give the CPCE. That was pencil and paper back then, by the way. You'd have to go up there with like Scantrons and stuff.
I understood. The Scantrons are back.
I used to make some money. So I would buy a pack of Scantrons at Walmart before class and charge a quarter, man. And by the end of that thing, I'd come out ahead. But it wasn't a lot. It was, but I would have like enough for like a couple of Cokes or something. But we used to do that, and then we switched to the portfolio design, and then none of us liked it because there were times that we're just like, this person cannot write, but we know they're going to be a good counselor. Like, I don't ever want to read one more sentence of this person, but I would send my patients to them for counseling, right? And so we needed something more objective. And to be honest with you, if you spend 2 or 3 evenings a week for like an hour studying, in about a month or 2 months, probably, you'd be pretty close to being able to make hit the 95th percentile on that test.
Thank you for the vote of confidence. Awesome.
What would we need to study? And I guess I need to check my email.
Does Rosenthal?
Yeah.
Rob, that sounds like me. And the all faculty meetings is like, oh, there's an email about this? Everybody's like, yeah, it came out. Like, there's been 7 emails, Dr. Armstrong. Where have you been? Not checking my email.
They have a lot going on.
Mr. Armstrong, you
Uh-huh.
said, what'd you say about stay an hour a day
So like
for,
if you took like an hour per study session, do that like maybe 3 times a week
oh, okay.
for about 2 months or so. And depending on how fast you study, but like there are some good study materials. I think Rosenthal's is one of them.
Yeah.
I don't make any money off that, by the way. I've got no disclosures. I wish I did. I wish I was important enough to have disclosures.
Right?
Sorry, I was affiliated with Pfizer's. They gave me $1 billion to say that. But I would recommend getting it out of the way. And the cool part is, instead of spending all that time making a portfolio that's subjectively graded, that may or may not have anything to do with whether or not you're going to get licensed or pass the licensure exam, now you get to spend that time, or you're going to be forced to, I guess, to spend that time to practice a test that you will have to take in order to be licensed.
Thank you. One other question, and thank you for
Uh-huh.
clarifying that for
Sure.
me. I do appreciate it. I didn't see it in the email, so if it's there, I apologize. I didn't read. I thought I read deeply enough. What's the cost of the exam, or is that built into our tuition?
It's $60.
60.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you
not.
very
I'm not.
much.
I couldn't remember. If I give it though, it'd be 65. 60 goes towards the test. $5 for Professor Armstrong
For gas
fund.
money. Got it.
Yep. For gas.
Thank you.
That's the truth. Especially if I have to drive to Garland. Actually, no, life insurance policy is what I want, because I got to beat that up if I'm gonna have to drive up there on 635. Man, has anybody been on 635 in a
Take
while?
the back roads. Take the back roads. Don't touch 635.
I'm
So
telling you,
horrible.
I can drive very fast and I'm real nimble and I'm on top of it, but I lose all my confidence when I get on that road. It feels like I'm like in Mad Max.
You're coming from Wiley. Just take 78. You'll be good.
I've tried that way too, but everybody gets angry when I cross George Bush. Everybody turns angry. Yeah, Wiley's even too big for me. I'm a Paris guy. We had 4 cars in Lamar County when I was growing up. We all carpooled. What other questions do you guys have? And thank you for asking those questions, Maya.
I actually had a question about the COGAT 7 changes. Is that, I mean, were you talking about just questions in general?
Oh, absolutely. That works too. I love,
Okay.
We can definitely talk about that as well. Yep.
Well, I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that like the differences in additions vary depending upon what test it is, as far as what changes are being made.
Right. So the difference in additions in most cases, all right, I'll be not so cynical, but a lot of times the profits start going down because competitors make newer additions that seemingly have better whatevers. And so everybody's kind of compelled to always constantly improve it in order to keep sales up. So that's the realistic side of me, the cynical part. But from a theoretical standpoint, a lot of times what's needed is an update to the norms. So like, especially here recently, we've had such rapidly changing culture over the past 20 years that, for example, like the MMPI-2 RF came out, I think like in the early 2000s, I want to say. And it used some norms that were derived from like the 90s, because as it turned out, there really wasn't much difference in cohort culturally. But then realizing like, hey, from 2010 beyond, we've had a culture that's been shaped like largely by social media and all kinds of stuff that has influence on the validity of some of these old tests if we continue to compare people to older generations. And so a lot of them, at least on paper, will say, hey, we got to come out with this new version because it needs to be updated for the norms. And while we're doing that, we might as well make it more structurally valid, in line with what we know on the neuroscience front or whatever. Yeah. Not a fan of the COGAT, honestly, but you said they're coming out. Are they coming out with the COGAT 7? Is that what it is?
Or I think they did, but there hasn't been a whole lot of research on it, or so that's I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I
And like even in our textbook, it said something about, hang on, although a Form 7 has been developed, technical information about it is not readily available. So this review examines
That's
Form
what-
6. Yeah.
yeah,
But I was
that's
just curious, just because we use
that's
that
what
a
I
lot in
was-
schools and stuff.
yeah. I have so there are, you wouldn't believe how many companies are out there that are publishing tests and selling those tests to not necessarily educators or like school districts as much as like doctors' offices and therapists and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, I believe it.
And that stuff ends up in court pretty frequently. And when it gets there, there's no experts on it. Like I had testify not too long ago, and there was a neurologist up in Illinois that had been sold some sort of system that takes a measure of somebody's cognitive ability without having to administer any cognitive tests.
How do you do that? Ugh.
Magic, I guess, because that was my answer. It was just like, I guess this test hinges on magic, because I don't know how it's supposed to measure what it's trying to measure. And then when you go online, type it in there to try to find out like anything, even their website itself would say, derived on all these people, on real patients, blah, blah, blah. Well, you email them and be like, hey, can I see the data? And they won't let you see it. It's proprietary.
Mm.
You just got to take them by their word. If they declare your patient to have a cognitive impairment, you just got to trust that the test got it right. Like, I don't know.
As a mental health professional, is that even ethical? Because to use something like that, because doesn't it have to be like evidence research based?
You hit it right on the head, which is why it's invalid. And because you can't, and doctors do it all the time, by the way. Doctors can get away with, I say doctors, physicians can get away with it more so than we can, because people just trust that they know what they're doing a lot of times more, to be honest. But yeah, it is unethical to not know where your data is coming from. Like, how are you going to interpret something if you don't know who you're comparing them to?
Right.
Yeah. So the COGAT, I'm not a huge fan of the COGAT. I'd be interested to know if they're holding back on providing that data in an attempt to update it with COVID, would be my guess.
Oh, okay.
Which is something that would be a positive thing for them. And that was my beef before, because a lot of schools are still giving the COGAT 6 or whatever it is that's normed on pre-COVID kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Huh? Also don't really like that acronym. It's like, sounds like I caught the COGAT. Sounds like a disease or something. Well, I had to go to the doctor's office, treat my COGAT. My COGAT's flaring up.
Okay,
But-
so I'm gonna ask a question that's probably, gonna get me, spanked later on, but it's bothering me, and I wanted to save it for my term paper for you, Dr. A.
Sure.
But the Enneagram and the MBTI,
Mm-hmm.
love them for the same reason. Lots of people, millions are taking it just because they want to see. They want to see.
Sure.
Tell me who I am. Tell me what you think you see, based on my results and how I'm feeling today. What my
Sure.
results say, and so doctors, psychologists like yourself, discredit both of those because they feel that for some reason they're not, even if people say that, oh my gosh, it's so accurate, how do they know me? But they're saying, no, throw it out. It's not reliable. It's a waste of time. It's just like you're looking at your horoscopes.
Mhm.
But here we are, and I was just wondering if, because we are looking at the counselor side of it versus at the
Mm.
doctorate or the terminal, degree level, is that why it's okay or seen as something more useful for counselors or therapists versus
Mhm.
on a higher level?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I spent a good decade of my life fighting against this Enneagram thing.
I see how they're connected. I mean, I can see how you could use it with your clients to support them. I just was,
Oh, I'm telling you. So
wondering.
I'm an empiricist. I love
You want the data.
science and I want the
Mhm.
data. And I don't like just being like, well, let's just make it up. But I had a counselor at the beginning of my grad school who introduced me to the Enneagram before it was real popular. And or it's kind of gone in waves. Like I guess it was popular back in the 70s or 60s or something. I don't know. Anyway, but
The 70s
she
when this
entered,
was developed.
I took it.
Right.
I remember taking the Enneagram test and being like, okay. And she made me like pick one. She was like, well, these are your top three. You got to pick one of those. One of them is you. I was like, well, how do I know which one? You just got to read it, see which one you identify the most with. At the time, I was very concrete. I was like, I'm tired of all this like fluffy stuff. Give me the science. And so I read it and I was like, wait a minute. Where does this stuff even come from? They're just like, where's this? How do we get the theory? Nobody really knows.
Mhm.
Except it's a math equation, but it's a weird like symbol. Looks kind of like a pentagon, honestly, like the star,
Pentagram. No,
the devil
yeah,
looking
no,
thing.
stop.
And it sounds weird. I can't say it right. And it had no like science backing up its validity in relation to making a diagnosis or like really much on the lines of like outcomes, therapy outcomes. And as far as I'm aware, it still doesn't have any like therapy outcome like data. So 10 years goes by, I've been teaching grad school this whole time. Every time I taught this class, I'd have to get to the section of the Enneagram and be like, ugh, okay. So there's an Enneagram, blah, blah, blah. That's what it does. And I'd move on. Then I got bored one time. I was trying to read some grad school papers. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take that Enneagram test because I was reading about it in this class or whatever, and I was like, I just want to see why it upset me so much back then.
Mhm.
So I retook it, actually got more into it, and just really was blown away personally by the depth available of how it facilitated my own personal insight into who I am, and also helping me understand relational dynamics in a way that no other test has ever. And I've taken them all. I've taken the Rorschach, I've taken them all, and they have all given me good data, but not nearly as qualitatively as the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And I like the Enneagram much more than I like the Myers-Briggs because the Myers-Briggs is more science-based. That sounds ridiculous, but the truth is I it's a qualitative piece that if somebody is antagonistic to the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, that says a lot more about them not being familiar with those tools than it
Okay.
does about the tools.
Okay.
That's my perspective because you get a lot of good information that you can't get otherwise, especially with the Enneagram. It really facilitates an empowerment of your client to learn
Yes.
about the Enneagram themselves because they have to, and then to just to do all your job, for you by self-reflecting on how they relate to it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love the Enneagram.
So
Most of y'all
those who
there's
discredit
mostly
it are
sixes in our
saying,
program, by the way.
I'm surprised to
Six,
hear that. I thought all of us would be
sixes,
twos.
twos, and threes. Yep, sixes, twos, and threes.
Okay, thank you. So it's not that we're weird or anything because we're going against what the actual the professionals in the psychology world are saying.
Right.
This is okay, this is right for us. If you get into it, and if you're saying that there's a chance that a person could have this kind of enlightenment of, okay, possibly we can use these tools if it's for
I have no doubt that there's
okay.
some outcome data there that could be figured out at some point, and that might even be out there. I don't know, but as long as you're not trying to use the Enneagram, and on to determine if somebody's like death row or not, or like to give custody to one parent or the other, like don't do that. Be very cautious with any test that you give during those situations anyway. But
Of course.
as long as you're not trying to do that, man, I think the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs are awesome. It can really, really shed light on things, and uniquely in each its own way, even though I like the Enneagram more. I do like the Myers-Briggs, and it's like cognitive aspect of like how you think. I really like how it explains that piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, there is data that shows that there are some, and it's not, of course, 100% across the board for every person,
But
but
correlated.
there's data that shows, right, the correlation between some of their, I don't know, is this the shadow, whatever it is, that's the unhealthy part of that, how it's connected to some of what you will find in the DSM, to see sometimes that there's a connection there. Not that they're going to absolutely do it, but the kind of
I'm telling you right
predisposed
now.
to certain things.
Type 1s are OCD, type 7s are ADHD, type 6s have generalized anxiety
Sorry.
disorder. I'm telling you. Now, I'm not saying that everybody does, but that is the tendency. If I know a person's type, I know that that's where they go in stress. Yep.
Well, and I would think
Sevens
that
are also OCD too.
wait, who else are OCD?
Type 7s and 1s.
Mm-hmm. I would think that the more tools that we have to be able to reflect on ourselves, in different perspectives would simply just, be a benefit and to be able to get all those different aspects, to either
really
reinforce or be,
or argue against. Yeah. And
yeah.
and that's where it takes some buy-in. Like I could have been helped by the Enneagram when I first took it way back at the beginning of grad school. I think had there's been more time spent educating me about it, and I would have had a buy-in for it. That's where the power comes in. Is if it, I've had clients that will come in and I'll be like, okay, everybody, all my clients take the Enneagram, so we're gonna do it. And then they take it and they're like, yeah, they're just not into it. I'm not gonna just force them, because if I try to do that, it's not gonna work. They're gonna be like me and be like opposed to it. So let's just take the Enneagram out of the equation and move on. But it can be a tool for sure. Yeah. I think it's just a lot of fun to especially understand relational dynamics and like the core needs, like what's really being, when two people are interacting, even if it's just like one of them selling a sandwich at a deli, there's an existential need being met by each of those people in that moment. And getting to the core of that existential need is what the Enneagram is about. And identifying like, hey, this is how you get your needs met, because you got this deep, fear of missing out. I'm a type 7, so that's my deep fear.
So if I don't check my compulsiveness to check every time I get a notification on my phone, the FOMO is an example of type 7.
So I
'Cause I'm
type
looking
sevens have a
here.
hard time saying no to opportunity.
Okay. Because I look so I Googled the question, and according to the Enneagram Institute, it talks about um 4s are more prone to depression, 6s are likely to have anxiety, type 4s uh, connect to borderline personality disorder, as well as, but it
There's a
also said
research article.
depression.
Let's see if I can find it. I think I've got it saved somewhere for y'all. Actually, it's an Enneagram research article on the psychopathology of the Enneagram and how it might help us inform like even diagnostics.
Because I'm a type 7, but I would never have identified myself as OCD or having ADHD.
So the obsessiveness of a 7 of living in the next moment that's better than this moment. Like getting hyper focused on things and topics of interest. That's the obsessive side, or at least for me anyway. And then the more stressed out I become, the more compulsive I am in perfectionism, like being like my experiences have to be perfect. Like if I'm planning I love planning a vacation. I hate going on vacation because the vacation's always better in my mind and never meets my expectations when I actually go. And so and the opposite's true of ones. Ones are more perfectionistic to begin with. The more stressed out they become, they start going all loosey goosey like 7s and just start acting out of character with all kinds of questionable judgment. Where that's where we live as type 7s is borderline questionable judgment in a good way. We kind of push boundaries in a good way. Where is this at? There's a really good article that I've read before that talked about all of the psychopathology stuff associated with it. See if I can find it. Has everybody taken the Enneagram? Like,
Yeah, I still can't figure out if I'm an 8, a 3, or a 2. I don't know. I'm just like, again, that must be because I'm a numbers person. I'm like, well, how many do I have to have on this checklist to decide? Because right now I'm kind of equal, and I don't
Sure.
like that.
Were you in your best mood when you took the assessment, Stacy?
I've
Were you
taken it
had a happy
5
mood?
different times over the past 20 years.
Okay,
And
okay.
literally, like,
And your
it
numbers keep
stresses me
fluctuating?
out.
You're a
not-
2 or a 3 would be my guess, Stacy. No, really.
Too, trying to see if it's going to change. And I found my
say a
results
2
from
or a
exactly a
3.
year ago now. And I was like, wow,
Yeah.
okay, same thing. Didn't change. My wings changed, but the core did not.
My wings changed too over time. Yeah. I was a 7. When I first took it way back in the day, I was a 7, 751, or was my 3 different numbers. And I remember being like, well, no, I'm a 5 because I'm a good professor. Like, and then my counselor was like, well, if that's true, then like you're a stressed out 5 because you act very 7-ish all the time. That's what 5s do. But no, I'm sorry.
I get accused of having OCD tendencies at times. Like, my desk will be a mess during the day, right? But before I walk out of the building, I have to make sure that everything is nice and neat and put back, and all my pens are organized and color coded. And I mean, like, that's how I plan everything, is color coordinating. And like,
that sounds like a 1.
But I know, see, I don't know. I must be, what was that? Do
Actually,
they still say
it sounds like a
multiple
2 with a 1
personalities?
wing. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah,
This dialogue is excellent because this is what we would do with our clients, right? Allow them to talk through, allow them to hear themselves, because what you just said, Stacy, you just walked us through.
Mhm.
You're orderly.
yes.
Your need for order, before you leave, even though the rest of the day might have been.
Which is,
Stacey,
I think, why I
what's your
struggle.
Myers-Briggs?
ENFJ. And that
Okay.
has never changed since I was a teenager. It has been an ENFJ.
So I doubt you're an 8 that's a feeler. I'm not saying it's impossible.
I'm an empath big time. Like, I take on other people's energy and emotions
Sure.
big
And
time.
I'm not saying that 8s can't be. It's just very rare for an 8 to be an F.
Ah.
It's extremely rare.
Okay.
Because 8s, 9s, and 1s are in their body, and 8s in particular are closer to the thinker side than they are the feeler side. So like if you were a 9, if you were a 1, you'd be more likely to be an F than if you were an 8.
Okay.
Because 2s, 3s, and 4s are the feelers in the Enneagram. 5s, 6s, and 7s are the head people, the thinkers. And then the 8s, 9s, and 1s are the doers. But even on the sides of the Enneagram and those tri-type, or the tri-types, I guess is what it is. But an 8 is closer to a 7 than they are a 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I again, this is why I struggle with tests. If I understand what it is I'm trying to get to, like how I'm supposed to take the test,
Sure.
then I feel more confident and then less anxious about going into tests like ACT, SATs. Those were, all those GRE stuff. That was not an issue for me because I knew exactly what it was. I knew how to prepare for it,
That's
so
the
it's
most
like,
J thing I've ever heard anybody say. Just that is the most J thing out of the Myers-Briggs. That's a J. Perfect description.
okay, how so? Explain that. Tell me more.
Just the need for to organize your world and to have it organized and predictable and in a good way, like to have it, to create order
Yeah.
is a big drive.
Which in turn creates calmness for me.
Which
Because
allows you to be engaged in the here and now in the environment.
absolutely.
Get your
Okay.
needs met. Yep.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
So I
That
have
tells
a,
me you're a 2 or a 1.
2 or 1. I'm gonna go back and
Mhm.
reread that again.
so I have a question. So if you take both of these tests and one is saying one thing and the other one is like completely opposite, could that be based off of when we took the test, how we were feeling?
So you're saying like, are you talking about you compare the Myers-Briggs versus the Enneagram?
Yeah.
In what way? Like, give us an example how they might be opposite.
That's what I'm asking. Like, is that
Mhm.
common? Because like my scores,
Uh-huh.
they seem to be in line. Both of the results seem to be in
Okay.
line. So is there like, is it common for someone to take both of these? Like we had to take both. And
Right.
one is saying one thing and the other one is like completely opposite. Is that common?
It's not very common. And I would say that the context of somebody taking one, like which one they took first might bias their attempt at the second, or might change their perception. They may take that and that's their first experience taking a personality thing, and then they take the Myers-Briggs and be like, well, okay, well, I approached the Enneagram this way. I'm gonna I'm gonna really be serious this time. You know what I'm saying? And so you can see some changes like that. And that's the problem is that Enneagram and even the Myers-Briggs, for the Enneagram especially, nobody knows the reliability of any of those assessments out there. Not really. I can tell you just anecdotally, it was pretty reliable over 20 years of me taking it. But the Myers-Briggs, I've gone back and forth between an ENTP and an ENFP. I've gone back and forth on that. Like it's like half the time I'm a T, half the time I'm an F. And I think it matters how emotionally full I feel. So like if I'm been pouring out a lot, I'm a T. I'm just like real logical, just like get out of here, stop crying. If I'm an F, if I'm like taking care of myself, I'm have a lot more empathy. Yeah.
One of the things that we were doing I'm taking a 2-day seminar on artificial intelligence. And one of the things we had to do part of today was take a personality test or a I guess it was a learning styles test. And in there, it says, oh, yeah, you answer these questions. And it said, okay, this is your learning style. And you would be best when you're paired with this other learning style. I noticed with the Enneagram, it says you're this, but your wings, which are, people you might want to associate with, or this and that. With the Myers-Briggs, what would be, or is there you work well with if you're this?
I think so. Just from a counterbalance standpoint to where like for example, you've got somebody that's high in an E, depending on the context, right? But like an E and an I, extrovert versus introvert, can absolutely benefit each other depending on the relationship, right? Where there's a pull towards the middle as a product of that relationship. And the idea for all these tests, even with the Enneagram, like I'm a type 7. I'm not trying to become only more of a type 7. Like I don't want to just be only a type 7. I don't want to, the more stereotypical type 7 I am, the less healthy I am. That's how I see the Myers-Briggs too, where I'm also an extrovert and I score really high on extroversion, like tip top. And every time I see that, I'm just like, I need to pare it back. Because too much of any of this stuff, one way or the other, can be detrimental. And so when you get relational pairings, whether that's in business or like at work or romantic relationships or friendships, the pairing is going to magnify when you get two extroverts together. It's going to magnify that trait. It's going to balance that trait when you get an extrovert and introvert together, if they're both capable of engaging with one another effectively. That's how I see it anyway. And that's where it helps, like couples, especially if you ever work with couples, to see, hey, I've got these extremes and it's okay. Like these are my traits. There's nothing wrong with that. Here are my partner's traits, and 1 + 1 equals 2, and the 2 is where we live and breathe in our relationship, and we can identify and learn to appreciate the otherness of other people through this process in a good way. I mean, I don't think there's a bad way to think about that, but increase our empathy. Yeah. How many of you does anybody have a P on the Myers-Briggs in here? Any other P's? Is everybody a J? Rod's a J, Stacy's a J, Maya's a J, Troya, you a J? Am I missing anybody else? I don't think so. Yeah, Sandra, what were
I'm
you?
a J. I'm a J.
Guys, I'm so sorry. I'm a P.
What does that mean?
I'm sure I'm stressing all of y'all out. Just like I'm keeping it too open-ended, man. I'm so sorry. This is why we did the learning style stuff. We learned that most of our students are about 50-50 E and I. A lot of students are on the N side and the F side and on the J side. So there's a lot of INFJs and a lot of ENFJs out there. If you're not a N, that's okay. Because even if you weren't, the people that weren't were really close to being N's. They're like balanced. So, but they were all J's. It was like maybe like 3 P's, and we're not really sure if they're still enrolled. So that's a joke. But I want y'all to know, when I took this in grad school one time, I took the Myers-Briggs like 4 times in grad school. I took it one time and I ended up being a J. It's also around the same time that the Enneagram, we were talking about it too, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm a 1. And the reason why is because I was in the middle of studying for all of my exams. I had all these due dates coming up, and like just a lot of pressure of deadlines and things I had to be organized for, and like all this stuff demanding of my time, and I was anxious. And so I look up to J's who are J's naturally, because you guys are just like, you just walk around just organizing stuff, and I love it. You're just like, I've got a deadline, I'm gonna stick to it. Just like it's, eating a ham sandwich. Like for me, a deadline is like anxiety provoking, and like I always think there's so much more that I want to be able to stuff inside this deadline. There's no way that deadline is going to contain it. And so at the same time, I would encourage you, Jays, and here's my word of advice that you can learn from us P's is becoming more comfortable with ambiguity and open-endedness, especially in counseling.
I agree.
The hardest part being a counselor as a J, what I hear is not being able to wrap up neatly each session. There are times that your client will leave crying and in an emotionally more distraught place than what they arrived, and that's going to be hard for you, Jays.
So what would you recommend, like in that situation? Like, how would, if we had a client that was crying and very distraught and then we were ending a session, like
I was going to say,
do?
Jays, just in general for Jays, I was going to recommend a vacation, but just kidding. That's a joke too. But
A
as a
spontaneous
therapist,
vacation.
right? Yep. Just take $7 and see how far that takes you into another country with no plans. Don't even plan. Yep. In fact, don't even take a car. Just walk. No. So with therapy, using your organizational skills to like maintain because you are good at boundaries for the most part. Jays are prone to being able to put some good boundaries around their time. And so the trade-off there is going to be, there are times that because you're good at those boundaries, it will produce events where clients go home in a worse place, at least subjectively anyway, and clearly needing to process more, but you don't have time for. My encouragement to you is that that's okay. Learning to be okay with that, because as long as they're not like suicidal, your job is not to get them in a happy place every hour. Your job isn't even to get them to a content place or a contemplative place. Your job is to facilitate their own journey. And sometimes you have to leave them just for practical reasons in order to be organized whenever they're taking a left turn on that road. But you'll pick back up with them next time and you can remind them that too. And here's the thing, they're going to trust you in that because you're so organized. It's just that you'll have to deal with your own feelings of like, this isn't wrapped up the way I wish it was. I'm the opposite, right? So like I can't see a full caseload the way Jay's can. I can't. I'm telling you. I don't know if I've ever had an hour therapy session. I used to, like in grad school, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have 5 clients today from 9 to 10 a.m. and then 10 to 12 or 10 to 11. I'm gonna eat, 27-minute lunch. I tried that. It doesn't work for me because I get in there and I forget about time. And in some ways, I can offer a more, I would say, more depth in a session than my J counterpart peers. But I'm going to be at the expense of being more emotionally exhausted and at the expense of not being able to help as many people. And so if anything, I've had to learn how to balance it more so and be more rigid and be like, you know what? This person's crying and we've gotten some really good stuff and I want to go into that good stuff. I'd rather do that than write, or read all these papers that my grad students sent me. And so I'm going to do that instead. So I've had to learn how to just kind of draw the line and be like, okay, it's going to have to be done. That's hard. It's hard to say that I'm done with something as a P. Everyone's like, yeah, we know, professor. You've been talking for 7 hours now. But all this stuff is, think about it this way. That's why I love the Enneagram so much, is every time I get like clients that come through, in my head, I'm not just analyzing them, but I'm thinking through like, okay, this person, I can see some 6 tendencies maybe, or like there's like a clear like theme in their life of like this push towards achieving. And where's that coming from? If it's a 2, they might have a 2 with a 3 wing, right? Where they're getting this relational fulfillment out of it, like this need, this affirmation of like of love and being affirmed and appreciated. Or they might be a 6, right? That in their anxiousness, is that right? I'm trying to remember if that's right. No. A 6 in their anxiousness, they become more like a 3 where they're holding really tightly to achievements in order to not feel insecure. Right? So like I'm thinking through all those kinds of things where as their story kind of fleshes out, it helps me kind of predict what's coming next, and at times honestly offer up some like insight, and they're just like, whoa, how'd you know? And as much as I appear to be confident in my head, I'm just like, I'm just guessing. But that's because I've got these concepts kind of embedded in there. And when I've seen patients get the most help out of the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram, when they own those things, I'm telling you, they'll end up being more experts than you will. And you're gonna be like, whoa, can you share me some of your resources? Because they're going to get really into it. And so will all their family members, whether they like it or not, and everybody in their social circle. Yeah. And then you start referring to their friends as like by their type. It's like, oh, that's, yeah, you mean type 8 said that? Of course they did. Right? The biggest thing is that the assessments that we give need to provide meaning, either meaning for us and our conceptualization of that person, and then probably even more importantly, therapeutically for that client. If it doesn't provide a therapeutic anything there, then what you're doing is not counseling, and it's you probably shouldn't be administering or doing whatever you're doing on the assessment front if it's not therapeutic, unless you're in a forensic situation, which is completely different. Yeah. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap this up right there. We will have class next week, and I will post this in Moodle. You all get extra bonus points in life, not in the class, but extra just life bonus points for showing up tonight.
Yay,
You get a
gold star.
I will give you all a certificate at the end of the class for showing up. You can put on your wall. In the meantime, do let me know if you have any issues or anything with the exams, or if you come across any good resources that I haven't already posted or anything on the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, shoot those my way, because I love reading about that stuff. Okay. All righty. Well, y'all have a great evening.
You
Stay
too.
cool out there.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
I'm
you
sorry.
all very much.
Thank
Have a good
y'all.
night.
I'm so sorry to
Bye,
keep you
guys.
over time, Jace. Jace, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
Oh, it was wonderful. That's perfectly. That's what we're here for. I need to learn all of it and soak it up. All of it.
Y'all have a
Good
good night.
information for the paper.
Bye.
Bye,
There
everybody.
you go, Rod.